All right, well, I think we are right at our start time, so I'm going to go ahead and officially kick off our webinar today and start by thanking all of you for joining us. My name is Matt Whitaker. I'm the Director of Integrated Programs with Compassion and Choices, and today I have the privilege to moderate today's webinar and to hear from all of you about what your questions are. But even more so, on a daily basis, I have the privilege of working with our end-of-life consultants here at Compassion and Choices. So we're excited to have you here for this webinar, which we're calling Ask Me Anything, a conversation with the Compassion and Choices end-of-life consultants. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in just a second. But before we do, some housekeeping. First off, just so you know, we are recording today's webinar, and we do that so that we can continue to offer this in perpetuity for those folks who aren't able to be at their computers today for our presentation. So we are recording. We'll put this recording up on our website shortly after we complete it today. Also, we have recordings of our previous webinars, as I'll talk about at the end. So stay tuned, and we'll make sure that you have all the information on those that are coming. The other quick piece of housekeeping, I already see some of you typing in our question and answer box. So if you have a question today, there's a lot of us on the line. So the way that we're going to do this is if you will write it in our Q&A box, you should see that in your Zoom webinar window. You can type your question there. It'll come to me, and I'll make sure as we get into our active question and answer session at the end of today's presentation that we are able to address those pieces. So again, if you have a question, make sure you add that into our Q&A box, and we'll make sure that that gets answered for you. If you are new to Compassion and Choices, we welcome you. And if you're someone who's a longtime supporter, we welcome you as well. So we are glad that you are here. If you are unfamiliar with our organization, just to give you a little bit about ourselves, Compassion and Choices, as our slide says, works to improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their end-of-life journey. So we believe that people should be able to approach end-of-life with the same values and priorities that they approach any other part of their life with. And we work to do that through legislative action, through education, and through support, which is what today is about. On the line today, we've got our two Compassion and Choices end-of-life consultants, Gina Johnson and Kimberly Foley. Gina is a long time, she's actually our senior end-of-life consultant because she's been here doing this work for a while now and comes to us with a professional counseling background and a lot of experience in that makes her a real asset to us here at Compassion and Choices. Kimberly comes to us from the hospice world, where she was a social worker, and she's actually a licensed clinical social worker. So we are lucky to have her here as well. And on a daily basis, Kimberly and Gina talk to people across the country who are weighing their end-of-life options, who are deciding how to go about starting this process, or who have specific concerns. And they provide information and emotional support to those folks. So we thought as a webinar, it would be nice for all of you to kind of hear, one, what the common questions are that come up and get some answers on those. So we've picked our 6 top questions that we get through our end-of-life consultation line. And then also to have an opportunity on this large platform to ask them questions so that hopefully we can answer some of those for all of you and get you pointed in the right direction. So we're glad you're here. If you're new to Compassion and Choices, welcome. Again, if you're a longtime supporter, thank you. And we are excited to get started with this Ask Me Anything. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question, and this is one that we get really often, which is, how do you open the conversation about end-of-life care with family members? And I'm going to direct that question to Gina. So Gina, how does a person do that?
It usually happens when somebody either anticipates a diagnosis that they might be getting from their doctor. It could be when they do get the diagnosis and just want to see what's next after that. Another part of the population that calls are the loved ones of patients who've gotten a diagnosis of cancer, and maybe it's a prognosis of terminal cancer, and they want to find out on behalf of their loved one what end-of-life issues and options they should be considering at this point. Most people that I found have, when they call us and they get the bad news, let's say they get a prognosis of 6 months or less and they are terminally ill and they've done all the emotional heavy lifting off stage, so to speak. So when they end up calling us, they are in the mode of rolling up their sleeves and saying, now what can I do? How can I make sure that my wishes are respected? And what options do I have in the world of medical choices or end of life options? So it can, it can be anybody who's calling with a really sophisticated background in medicine, and another person who, we get this a lot, especially with like people my age and older, the older baby boomers who are kind of conditioned to just nod and agree with whatever the doctor says, And so they realize that can't be everything, but they may be too shy to tell the doctor or ask the doctor things, or may be reluctant to say, the path you've laid out for me for medical interventions is burdensome and I don't want to do it. But they don't know how to say that to their doctor, or they don't know how to convey that information to their family. Because of course, with every family member, they're probably going to get a unique perspective and opinion. So they want to get themselves grounded in the information first, usually before they start sharing it around. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Yeah. And on each of these questions, I'm going to also provide afterwards for folks who are watching just a short resource that we have around that question. In the section that we'll put on our website with the recording of today's conversation, we'll also make sure that there's links to each of the resources that we mentioned. So if you are opening these conversations and starting these dialogues, a great resource is our End of Life Decisions Guide. This is available on our website. You also can order a paper copy of it, but it has guides for starting those conversations that Gina talked about. And I wonder, Gina, if you could share the story that I love so much about the client who intentionally set her family down to talk over dinner about her end-of-life
Absolutely.
wishes.
And this is another thing in family dynamics. Usually it's us older people who want earnestly, we're not looking for sympathy. We just want to talk about things are wrapping up here and I want to make sure all my ducks are in a row so you guys don't have to run into each other trying to cobble together support for me. So if I have a medical emergency, I want you to be the person who advocates for my wishes. I want you to be able to do this for me. And what happens a lot of times, unfortunately, is family members turn around and say, oh, grandma, you're going to outlive us all. Why are you even bringing this up? So this one lady in New England, she said she had the hardest time. She had a nice big family and everybody loved and supported her, but she was consistently shut down by every family member she tried to approach about what her medical wishes would be in case of a medical event or an emergency. And so she hosted Thanksgiving that year, and she said, I put a copy of my advance directive on the plate of every person at that table. And she said, I told my family, nobody's eaten until we review this together. And so, it's a deal stopper. Everybody wants turkey and stuffing, right? So they were able to have that conversation because she finally said, you must hear me. You must listen to this. It's important. It may be uncomfortable, but it's important.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Gina.
Sure.
So we're going to move on to question number 2, which is on the opposite side of the coin. So we've talked about how you open up the conversation with family, and Gina alluded a little bit to the reticence also to oftentimes speak to your physician or your healthcare providers. So Kimberly, if a person is looking to find a supportive doctor, a doctor, as Barbara Coombs-Lee says in her book, Finish Strong, who is a real partner, a partner doctor, how does a person go about that? What do those conversations look like?
So there are several different ways that a person can go about that. They could just schedule an appointment with their doctor to just discuss what their wishes are. They can have a very, very frank conversation with their doctor. And then we have a finding a partner doctor palm card. There are questions on the back of that card that they can use to kind of gear their conversation with their doctor around what their wishes are. They can also provide a copy of their advance directive we have an online tool where they can create an addendum to their advance directive. So they can create that and provide that to their doctor to review. And then they can ask their doctor to confirm whether or not that they're willing to honor the client's wishes and if that directive would be incorporated into their medical record. There are two more. Another way would be to share a copy of the doc-to-doc consultation card and explain that it could be helpful if they spoke with their doctor, if they spoke to the doc-to-doc program to make sure that their wishes are honored, and then provide this patient-directed end-of-life care, make sure that what they're wanting actually is aligning with what their doctor is understanding that they're wanting. And then if their doctor is unwilling to be supportive of your wishes, then you can always explore finding a new doctor. That's always an option. And with that, some doctors aren't aware of the fact that they can actually be reimbursed for an annual conversation about end-of-life wishes. So just educating the doctor that is actually an option. You can go onto our website and you can find a link to the document that discusses the Medicare coverages for end-of-life discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kimberly. And again, we do have resources on the website specifically tailored to this question. This is a really great palm card about finding a partner doctor that goes through some of the tips that Kimberly just talked about, as well as gives some questions to ask to guide that conversation. If you're like me, oftentimes I have the best of intentions going into those meetings, and then it all goes out the window as soon as I get in that exam room and sit there waiting and getting nervous, and the blood pressure cuff goes on and all those pieces. So it can be really helpful to have, again, these aids as you have those conversations. So thanks, Kimberly, for outlining that for us. Our next question for Gina, and this comes up all the time, is what can and what can't go in an advance directive? So as people are adding addendums and things, what are kind of the constraints on that, Gina, and how much can a person do?
Sure. What I want to do first is just define what an advance directive is. An advance directive has two parts. The first part is where you are declaring what your medical wishes would be in case you become incapacitated and can't speak up. The second part is designating a trusted person to advocate for those wishes in case you can't speak up. So an advance directive is only applicable if you can't speak up for yourself in that moment. So an advance directive has everything. It can run the gamut of, I don't care what got me to the emergency room, pull out all the stops, make sure I get every medication and every tool and every piece of equipment possible to keep me alive. That's one option. Other people go the other way where they say, if I can't breathe on my own, I don't want a machine to breathe for me. If I can't feed myself, I don't want a machine to feed me. If I get an infection, let's say I'm in a coma in the ICU and I get an infection, do I want that treated, or do I just want to be kept comfortable while that takes its course? So it can run, it can run the gamut of things. So an advance directive can contain all of those things. What it can't contain, a couple things, is it can't, if say you live in Oregon, it's a medical aid and dying state. And a lot of people call and say, well, I want to put that in my advance directive that if I'm not going to live, then I want them to pull the plug or to give me medication for medical aid and dying. That is not applicable in an advance directive simply because part of that process is verbally requesting the medical aid and dying from your doctor and going through the steps that we're going to review with you. So an advance directive can't contain the wishes for medical aid and dying because you have to be perky and alive and able to ask for it directly from your doctors. The other thing that I usually try to encourage people to do is if you designate a trusted person to be your healthcare advocate or proxy or surrogate, it depends on the state, that you have a backup person, like person A, because a doctor doesn't want to face a room full of people who all have equal say. So what the doctor wants to do is speak to the designated advocate for the advance directive and for the patient. But they may be out of town, they may be in the hospital, who knows? So you want a plan B, a person B listed too in your advance directive, just in case. And as important is to make sure that if there's anybody in your life that you do not want to be a part of your medical wishes, you designate that name as well. So, I want my eldest son, Brad. I want my eldest daughter, Emily. But I do not want my sister, Lola, because she, we don't agree on medical issues and I don't want her included in my decisions, something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gina. Thank you very much. And again, we have resources around advanced directives and a whole host of different kind of addendums that people can add on our website. So if you go to our Plan Your Care section of the website, as you'll see here, these are just some of the pieces that are available there to be able to add to your advanced directive. A conversation that is at the forefront right now in our organization and just kind of in the consciousness is a conversation around dementia. And as Gina said, in your advanced directive, you can't lay out your wishes for medical aid in dying, especially related to something like dementia, but there are options that are available. So this is another question that we get really frequently, which are, what are options to plan for dementia? So Kimberly, I wonder if you could kind of take us down that route.
Sure. So on our website, we have a Dementia Values and Priorities tool, and it's a really great tool that helps individuals kind of write down their wishes while they're still able to make those sorts of decisions, so that what their wishes are made known to their family and medical personnel, and nobody has to feel guilty about making a decision for the person. So it's your words, your wishes at the time, and then someone that you designate can make sure that those wishes are followed for you. You can learn about the tool on our website, but you can also call us to talk about it if you want to go through it or you have questions as you're going through it. I know oftentimes people come up with questions about the way they interpret the question, the way it's written, so feel free to call us anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kimberly. And just a little screenshot of what that looks like. Again, it's really for a person who's either planning for a dementia diagnosis in the future or has been diagnosed but still has capacity to make those decisions. And as Kimberly said, it takes you through a whole host of steps of what the progression of a dementia prognosis looks like and all the different kind of key markers so that you can talk about how your care preferences would change as you reach each of those stages. So again, a really important thing, and as Kimberly said, something that we're always happy to talk to folks about. And I know that Kimberly talks to folks on a regular basis about this tool. So let's shift gears a little bit into two more questions that we get often, which are pretty specific to medical aid in dying. So Gina, for you, this is a question that comes up where people say, how do I move to a state where medical aid in dying is authorized? And how do those conversations go when somebody brings up the possibility of moving?
Sure, yeah. I want to back up and just add a little bitty thing to our talk about advanced directives and dementia and COVID or whatever else is coming up in your advanced directive is it really does just boil down to what your values are. What moves the choices that you make on a daily basis, those values that actually make it easier and simpler for you to move left or right during the day. And those values are definitely going to be reflected in your advanced directive. And so that will help you decide if you're faced with these questions, say on our dementia questionnaire, or if a doctor asks you questions. It's always best to just revert back to your basic values so that you can speak authentically from your core. So how do you move to a state that's medically authorized for medical aid in dying? So there's 9 states plus the District of Columbia, and it's Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, California, Montana, Colorado, Vermont, New Jersey, Maine, and DC. Did I get them all? Yes. Okay.
I think you did. I was checking the map mentally as you were going, and I thought, wow,
Yeah.
she's really getting them in order too. So.
Yeah, I think geographically, yeah. So those states authorize medical aid in dying, and that means that a doctor is allowed to write a prescription for a lethal dose of medication to bring about your death, only for terminally ill people with 6 months or less to live. So having said that, most of the people we do talk to are within that 6-month window. And so we tell people, you're a free agent. You can choose to do what you will or what you won't. But I want to make sure that you're well educated in the process, the criteria, the steps, the process of accessing medical aid in dying, so that you can better evaluate where you want to spend your last few months and where you want to spend your last bit of energy. So moving to a state that has medical aid in dying is a matter of, what I usually coach people to say is, if they are, let's say Oklahoma, and they want to move to Oregon. So I say, well, ideally what you want to do is talk to your current doctor and get a referral to a doctor in that town where you plan to move. And then you can transfer records, and then you can get going from there. The hard part is sharing your intention with a medical provider in one of those states before they ever set eyes on you. So that's a dicey conversation to have, but you can move to a state, you can establish residency, you can, and you can do that. It's not necessarily a minimum number of days, weeks, or months. It's just, can you prove residency? So you move however you can. Some people go all by themselves. They just say, this is such a high value and priority to me to have control over my dying, that I am willing to leave my loved ones. I'm willing to leave my home. I'm willing to leave everything that brings me comfort for the opportunity to have this choice. And that's amazing and enormous. Other people pull up stakes and bring the whole family to the new state and establish care with their doctors there. I'm trying to think what else. When you do that, just be aware that it's going to take time, because usually medical aid in dying requires finding 2 supportive doctors. There's also a requirement of a wait period between requests and things like that. So it's not the immediate put a coin in the slot and out comes your medication. It's going to take time. And I tell people, even if you move and all the planets align in your favor, it can still take weeks to months before you get that final prescription. And again, I don't want to be a downer, but I do want to make sure people clearly evaluate what they will be in for if they do choose to make the move. And then conversely, I tell people, if you are just, the highest value is controlling your dying, you can do that at home. We can endorse the option of, again, you're a free agent, you can do what you want. But what we can endorse is your choice to stop any unwanted medical treatment. To have a conversation with your doctor and say, I'm taking 17 medications. Are all of these really crucial if I want to stop all these? Which ones are just simply for comfort? And which ones are you giving to me to hopefully keep me alive longer? And having that conversation with the doctor to assess every medication on your list and what it's for and why you're taking it, just to make sure that, again, you're on the same page as your doctor. Your doctor is the expert on the medication and the medicine background. You are the expert on you and what your tolerances are and what your body wants and doesn't want. So you're working in collaboration. The other part that we can endorse is if you want to control your dying by simply stopping eating and drinking. We call it VSED, so it's VSED, and that stands for voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. It's your right to do. We all have that choice. It's more of an option for some people than others. Some people still really, the last thing they really still enjoy on this earth is food, so they don't want to stop. Other people say, I've lost a significant amount of weight. Food doesn't even sound good. Liquids are a bother. So I think this option might be best for me. And so I can talk to people about that option and, you know, what to expect, how to talk to the doctor, how to talk to their hospice, and the progress, and, you know, just inform the family as well. Anything that I didn't cover that we want to make sure we touch on?
No, I think you nailed it on that one, Gina.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for outlining kind of the whole piece of the decision tree for a person. And as you said, that for those of you who aren't in a state where medical aid in dying is authorized, that doesn't mean that there are not options for you to be able to take control at the end of life and to exercise your agency. With that in mind, Kimberly, you know, Gina alluded to the process of medical aid in dying and what that entails. And that's another question that we often get, is that even for folks who perhaps have supported our efforts in advocacy or have been along for the movement for a long time, there's still some ambiguity about what steps are necessary for accessing medical aid in dying. So I wonder if you could just talk, you know, in general about what those steps tend to be, you know, recognizing that from state to state, there are some idiosyncrasies, but again, those kind of common criteria.
Sure. So the common criteria for sure is that you must be a resident of an authorized state in which you intend to use medical aid in dying. And like Gina had talked about, VSED, we call it MAID for medical aid in dying. You have to have been diagnosed with a terminal illness with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. You need to be 18 years or older. You need to be mentally capable of making your own healthcare decisions, and you also need to be able to self-administer the medication. So nobody can do it for you. You need to do it yourself. So that's the criteria. The process is a little more, I don't know what the word is. There's more to it. So for the process, you make 2 verbal requests like Gina had talked about. So you make your initial verbal request to your primary physician, and then 15 days later, 15 calendar days later, you make a second verbal request. Sometime in between there, you make a written request. And on our website, you can find this information. There's a form on there, but that written request can be done anytime within that 14, 15 days. Only the patient can make the request. It can't be made through an advance directive or by a family member or friend. It has to be made by the patient to the doctor and not like a nurse or an office staff member. In addition to the prescribing physician, there's a consulting physician. So sometimes people call that the second doctor. This doctor will certify that the patient is eligible to use the law and that they're both making an informed decision and a voluntary request, so that they're making it on their own and that they're not being coerced or anything to do it. The patient must fill out the request for the medication. That's a medication form. And this can be completed and given to your to the primary physician, like I had said earlier, anytime within that 14 days. So then at least 48 hours after the written request for the medication is signed and dated, then the doctor, the prescribing physician, can write the prescription for the patient. The prescription has to be sent directly to a pharmacy by the doctor. The pharmacies won't accept like a handwritten prescription if the patient shows up with it. The minimum amount of time, so this isn't for every state, like Matt had said, there are little differences, you know, between states and stuff, but the minimum amount of time is 15 days. So, you know, some people wait and they're actively dying and they want to do this, and there just simply isn't enough time for them to complete the process, and there's no way to change the law so that they can. Let's see. So back to what I had said about the person has to be able to self-ingest the medication themselves. It's not an injection. Nobody can give an injection to the person. They actually have to be able to take the medication, and that's usually by swallowing it or through like a feeding tube if the patient has a feeding tube. Let's see. Sorry, I have some notes, so I'm trying to make sure I hit them all. So depending on the state that you're in, a designated family member or friend may be able to pick up your prescription from the pharmacy, but again, the prescription has to be sent directly to the pharmacy by the doctor, not by a patient or family or friend. One thing that's really, really important, I think, is that the patient has a right to withdraw the request at any time. And even if they do receive the medication, that doesn't mean they have to take it. A lot of people just find a lot of comfort in knowing that they have that option if they choose to take the medication at a later time. There's a lot of information here. So we like to send people to Dr. Group's video on our website. He really does a great job of explaining the entire process in detail. And it's really helpful for family members and patients to be able to go back and review this, because it's got so much helpful information. It's such a great resource, but it also is encouraging for the patient to be able to have a resource to go back and look and see exactly like, what did he say about this 14-day thing? So Dr. Group's video is a really helpful resource, and it is also on our website. I think Matt just put it up there, I'm not sure. So a couple of really important things just to consider. Like I had said, just because a person might get the medication doesn't mean they have to take it. They can choose to not take it at all. They can start the process and stop if they want, or they can, you know, it's your choice. Like Gina says all the time, we can't tell you what to do. You can do what you want to do, but nobody, you know, you don't have to follow through with it just because you get the medication. And then the other thing, like Matt had said, is that there are some differences in different states, little minute differences, but you're welcome to call us and we can go over those based on whatever state it is that you're needing the information. And so then, oh, go ahead. Matt, were you going to say something?
Oh no, I was just on the edge of my seat listening.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so last but very important thing that I will say about this is a lot of times the first question people have is like, how do I find a doctor? I need a doctor, I need to find a doctor. So like Gina had said earlier, we really encourage people to speak with whoever they're seeing at the time or any doctors that they've maybe had in the last 5 years. So that's the best place to start, is who you actually have a relationship and rapport with. We, as consultants and EOLC and Compassion and Choices that I know of, don't maintain a referral list of individual physicians for any state, but we do have a database of supportive institutions. So it's called our Find Care tool. It's on our website, super easy to use, and you can just plug in your zip code and the mile radius that you would like to search, and then you can, if there are any results, it'll generate a list for you, and then it gives you a starting place. It doesn't give you a doctor's name, but it does give you a starting place. So that's really all I've got for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kimberly. And as she said, the good news is at the end of this webinar, there's not a test. So all of those steps that she just talked about are listed on our website. But as you heard, it's a process. And because of that, I think, Kimberly, when you said, this is something that a person could withdraw at any point, one of the kind of key takeaways of that is, if this is something that you're considering, go ahead and have that conversation. Kimberly talked about the Find Care tool, and it's a great place to look to determine even early on, if you're receiving care in an institution that allows participation from physicians. So sometimes we get calls from people who are in their last weeks or days of life, and not only is there not time for them to get through that process, we're lucky in Oregon just this last year, they passed an amendment to the law that can shorten the process for people who have imminent circumstances. But even with that, we get calls from people who then discover in that moment, oh, I received care at a hospital or a healthcare system that doesn't allow physicians to participate, and I'm going to need to reestablish care elsewhere. And that takes time.
Yeah.
So that's a decision that you can make even before you have a terminal prognosis. I always say it's like when you vote with your pocketbook or with your wallet, making sure that you're supporting businesses or people who align with your values. In the same way, as you're having those conversations about who you're going to get your Medicare plan through, or who your primary care physician is going to be, or how you're going to approach care related to a specific illness, you can look at that Find Care tool and determine, this healthcare system, it looks like they align more with my values and that they'd be able to support me if this came about in the future. This other one, not so much. So I just, again, encourage people, as Kimberly said, to start this process early. And like I said, if you're listening to that and going, that's a lot of steps and I can't write that fast, not only is this webinar going to be recorded, but also we have these resources on the website.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of that in mind, that takes us through our top 6 questions. And so we are coming to the part of the webinar where we take your questions. We did call this Ask Me Anything. So I hope that you've been populating the question box. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just 1 minute so that we can go ahead and talk about some of the questions that have come up over the course of the webinar. So one question, Gina, that I'll direct to you, which is about the medical aid in dying process, is somebody said, I hear you saying that, well, a couple of people said this actually. I hear you saying that, multiple doctors have to be involved, but I receive my care from a nurse practitioner, or somebody else said I receive my care from a physician assistant. Are they able to prescribe medical aid in dying medication?
Unfortunately, no. It's medical doctors only. And for some reasons, they also specify, I can't pronounce it, it's the bone doctors, whatever they are. So the OD, MD, OD, and so
MD and DO, Doctor of Osteopathy.
Thank you, osteopathy. So those are the only 2 really that are recognized, and it's unfortunate. However, that person that you currently see could refer you to a doctor who can prescribe. So what I do is really encourage people to plumb the depths of the options they have on hand. And, the old business adage, like the lowest hanging fruit, whatever is the most immediate opportunity and the easiest for you to reach, grab it first. Don't go out of your way to find new people if you don't have to. So if you talk to a doctor and they say, no, I'm not willing or able to support you, then the next question would be, would you be willing to share a name about a doctor who is more supportive? Or if you're not willing to prescribe, would you be willing to be the second opinion doc? The one that just concurs and agrees with the criteria. So yeah, just squeeze them dry. Whatever your options are at hand that you have, don't walk away from an opportunity.
Great, thank you. This is a question I'll direct to Kimberly, which is about the VSED process. So somebody said, I hear you talking about voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. Isn't that uncomfortable? That I've heard that it's really agonizing. How does hospice support a person, for example, who is making that decision?
So, it's different for every person. Every person's body is different. Everybody reacts differently to things. So as far as hospice goes, hospice is their primary support is, they're not their primary support. Their primary reason for being there is to support patients through end of life and to make sure that you do remain comfortable. So hospice can make sure that you have medications on board. If it is uncomfortable, you know, being hungry at the beginning, they can make sure that you've got medications for that. They can make sure that they're working with your doctor as well. And for, you know, comfort throughout end of life, it expands far beyond just the medications. They make sure that you have all of the DME, which is like durable medical equipment, so beds, anything that you might need to be comfortable. So a person may go on to hospice, and hospice is truly their primary reason for being there is to make sure that you do remain comfortable throughout the end of your life. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure it does.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that gets to kind of what people were asking, which is, you know, how does a person stay comfortable in the midst of that? Another question that I'll answer that has come up is, you know, we mentioned hospice in relation to voluntary stopping eating and drinking, but what if a person, you know, stops eating and drinking before they're in the 6-month window and eligible for hospice? Actually, I'll direct that to Gina, because I know that you've worked with folks who are in that spot. How do they go about pursuing hospice once they begin that process?
Usually what happens is a person may start the process, and I also want to emphasize, this is not something you can do alone. And this is just like the, you know, the old thing about it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a village to help somebody go. And the idea is if a person says, this is simple and under my control, I want to choose to stop eating and drinking as a way to control my dying, then the person can start anytime, you know, with your last meal, that how it could have started. But knowing that the first couple days, you're probably going to still be energetic, moving around, doing your daily stuff. But eventually you're going to start feeling weaker. You're going to need more help and attention. And that's when you can contact your hospice or your doctor and say, listen, I think, you know, these are the things that I've noticed. I'm not eating that much. It's not that pleasurable to me. I'm sleeping more. And I think this is it for me. And I'm okay with that. I just don't want to suffer. Can you refer me to hospice or some kind of care? And either the doctor can say yes or no. If the doctor says yes, they usually work with a hospice that they'll refer you to. If they say no, you can still maybe contact a local hospice and tell them what you're going through and say, can you tell me if I meet criteria for being admitted to your services? And if they say, well, yeah, you're sleeping more, you're not getting up, you don't have this kind of ability anymore, we can kick in. We'll just talk to your doctor and get his authorization, and then, you know, we'll start services. If the hospice says no, then you can just say, well, tell me what you're looking for so that I know what symptoms to be on the lookout for so that I can contact you when I start feeling those things. But it really is a matter of being able to cobble together whatever kind of support you need if you want to stay home to do this. Now, I want to state the obvious here is that conversation I usually have with somebody who's 79 and just kind of wrapping up. They know things are going downhill and they're okay with that. They want to just maintain some control. That's a whole different take on a conversation with their doctor from if they're 29. And the doctor will say, well, wait a minute, you're only paralyzed. What is that about? You know, so you may not get the same kind of support, I guess is what I'm saying. If you're elderly and in decline, that conversation makes more sense than if you're younger and where, you know, they see life, they see hope, and they don't want to shut anybody down or be a part of that if they don't have to.
Great answer. Thank you, Gina. As someone pointed out in the chat box, there's a great film called Dying Wish that we refer people to often about a retired surgeon who chose to voluntarily stop eating and drinking, and it kind of portrays that piece. There's another.
I just want to add a little feedback we got about that film. If nobody has ever worked with somebody who's dying or who's been off their food for long, it can be a little alarming. The man is very, 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 very thin. He still has great attitude, and so does his wife. But a lot of people visually, they weren't prepared for that.
Oh, Yeah, thanks for raising that, Gina. A question came up about a person who uses medical aid in dying, and particularly about, if a person's making this decision, they want to take the medication at home, how do they ensure that 911 doesn't show up, or EMTs don't show up, or the sheriff's department doesn't show up, or whatever it might be, to kind of impede that process and to make sure that they're able to follow through with their wish. And I'll take this one because I'm the biggest cheerleader for hospice in the world. And one of the reasons why hospice is so important, outside of what Kimberly outlined, which is that they provide incredible comprehensive support for people, that they address your spiritual, your social, your physical needs, as well as those of your family and those who are around you taking care of you. But they also provide a very practical support when it comes to things like arranging for funeral services and mortuary and all of those different things, and making sure, because you're on hospice, that when the time comes that a person dies, either from the course of their illness or from ingesting medical aid and dying medication, that it's not something that has to be investigated by a coroner, or that the sheriff's office has to show up, or anything like that. In fact, I worked in hospice for a bit. One of my roles was going out to folks who weren't able to get on hospice in time and who passed. And oftentimes the family was left then without support as the sheriff's department came and investigated, and they tried to set up at last minute for support from the funeral home. And so that can be a very traumatic experience, and one where, again, the people who are around you aren't able to get that support. So if a person is on hospice and has that support, you shouldn't have to worry about these pieces. And that's why it's so important to do that. Also, when you get on hospice, they'll make sure that the documentation, proper documentation is done to make sure that you're not resuscitated, for example, against your wishes, that those things are all documented and available, and they should advocate for you. One thing I will add is that hospices are just like any other business or nonprofit, in that there are ones that are better than others. And so sometimes we hear about the extremes here at Compassionate Choices, people who had amazing experiences and people who had not great experiences with the customer service, perhaps, that they received from a hospice. So we want to make sure that you know that you have the right to choose your hospice, and to interview and to have conversations and to decide, if there's one that aligns with your values. I'm in Portland, Oregon. We have over a dozen hospices here just in the metro area. Each one of them kind of has their specific niche of what they offer and what type of clientele that they serve. So know that you have that option, and that, again, that can really solve that problem that was brought up in the question box. The last question that I'll pose to both of you, Kimberly, I'll pose it to you first and then to Gina, is that there have been a lot of questions in the question box, and we'll make sure that we refer you in just a moment to some resources about this, but around COVID-19, which is, again, front and center in all of our minds, and something that's causing a lot of people to look at end-of-life planning. So apart from the resources that I'll reference in a moment, people were just wondering, how has this changed your day-to-day work? What type of questions are coming up for people, and kind of what type of advice are you giving? So Kimberly, I'll ask that to you first, and then to you, Gina.
One of the biggest questions that I've noticed that has come in around COVID-19 is, do I have to be put on a ventilator if I don't want to, or can I just stay at home and be done at home? And I learned from Gina, so I say a lot of the things that Gina says, and I tell them, nobody can tell you what to do. You're a free agent. You're able to make those choices for yourself. However, if you do find yourself in a hospital and you don't have an addendum to your advance directive, or somebody who's speaking for you with whatever documentation you have to show exactly what it is you want, if you don't have that, you are most likely going to be put on a ventilator. Doesn't mean you will for certain, but that's my guess. So I always just encourage people to make sure that your advance directives and any addendums regarding COVID-19 or anything that you're really concerned about or really actually against, more so than not, are actually in writing, and that you have an agent available to speak for you to make sure that those wishes are carried out.
Yeah. Yeah, the same thing for people who are concerned about it. Usually they're older people that we get the phone calls from, and they're concerned about this, mostly about the ventilators, especially initially when we were hearing on the news how scarce ventilators were getting. That's not so much the case anymore. And I think people have kind of made a new adjustment to COVID as part of the world and as part of their decision making. The thing that people don't consider too often, and I tend to forget to point it out, is like in the midst of a medical event, all your best rational thinking goes right out the window. So this is why it's imperative that you have conversations, not once, not twice, but have it as an ongoing piece of your conversation with your loved ones about what your medical wishes are. Does everybody know where your paperwork is? Does everybody know the phone number to call? And if I'm on hospice and something happens, who do I call, right? So those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure are in place so that when and if something actually happens, people are not caught off guard so much and are able to default to what they've been told or how they've been taught you want things done.
Thank you, Gina.
Yeah.
And along with that, we have more questions than that we could possibly answer in 2 hours of this. So I think we're going to have to do a follow-up to this or a follow-up recording. We'll have to talk afterwards, Gina and Kimberly, to answer some of these questions that have come in around various other themes. So we really appreciate those questions, and many of them are tag-ons to some of those common concerns that we brought up. Specific to the COVID-19 questions, I want to make sure that everyone knows on our website we have a new COVID-19 toolkit that talks through a lot of these pieces. So understanding what all of these words are that you're hearing on the news around ventilators and hospitalists and shortages and all of the things that are coming up, as well as some tools to actually engage with problem solving around what type of care you would want if you were in that scenario. So I want to make sure that everyone knows specifically that those resources are available. Also, I want you to know that we on our website have our end-of-life planning resource center, our Plan Your Care resource center, that has information on all of these topics that we talked about today and more. Again, I think we're going to have another conversation about the and more, because all of you are really engaged. So I hope that what we shared brought value and we can find a way to answer some of those follow-up questions as well. We also have a link to our Tools to Finish Strong. That's our dementia tool that Kimberly talked about, as well as a host of other resources that are there on our website. So I encourage you to check those out. And if, as Gina and Kimberly were talking, you thought, you know, I might need to have a conversation with them because I'm really wondering about how to navigate some of these pieces, or, you know, there's a specific thing that I need support around, or I'm looking at these pieces, but they're not making sense to me. We're here. We're here and happy to help through our consultation services. You can reach those through our 800 number or by email at ulc@compassionandchoices.org. Also, if you're someone who has a relationship with others here at the organization, people who you're working with, and you forget this piece, say, can you please get me to EOLC? So we'll make sure that we are able to, again, tend to your concerns and be helpful in helping in your specific situation. You know, for so many of us, we just need a little bit of information and to be pointed in the right direction. And after that, again, we're able to really work to exercise our values, which are so important. If you're wanting to become more engaged, we also go into a whole host of other issues in more depth in our webinars that we've done through our Staying Stronger Together webinar series. So if you're new to this series, you may not know we have done over a dozen of these webinars over the past few months as we've all been at home and figuring out how to gain community in a different way. So on our website, we have recordings of those, We'll have recordings of this webinar as well as links to the resources that we referenced. But you can go to that page for all things webinars. So you'll be able to see all those different ones that have taken place over the past few months, as well as register for upcoming webinars that will be taking place. You also can find us on social media. So if you're wondering how to get notifications about these pieces, we are there. We're on Twitter, both Compassionate Choices has a page, and our CEO, Kim Callanan, has a page where you can follow her. She shares some really interesting insights on things that are happening in the healthcare world. So I would encourage you to follow there. We're on Facebook, if that's your preferred method of community, on YouTube, and on Instagram. So if you are active and follow things that you're interested in, we encourage you and invite you to follow us. And with that in mind, I also want to remind you, if you're new to Compassionate Choices, I want you to know that, and you're wondering how we go about offering things like today's webinar, that we are exclusively funded by individual donors like you, almost exclusively individual donors like you. And thanks to a generous supporter, up until June 30th, 5 days from now, any funds that are being donated are matched 1-to-1. And so in the midst of this uncertain time where we are at home and we are trying to figure out how to navigate this new world, Compassionate Choices is remaining active and remaining committed to the work that we're doing, and committed to continuing to show value to all of you through things like these webinars, and even more so committed and grateful for the community that we're able to build. You know, on today's call, we had over 150 of us across the country engaging in this conversation together. And that's a really special thing, something that we're not able to do too often in our current moment. So if what you heard today, the services that we provide, the resources are things that feel important to you and that bring value to your life, and you're able to do so, I would encourage you to make a donation and support our work, because as I said, we are committed and we're not going anywhere. We're going to make sure that we continue to do this work in whatever way that we can, and we continue to reach you in whatever way that we can. With that in mind, we are at the top of the hour. We want to be respectful of folks' time. I hope that today brought you some value. We certainly value you and are grateful for you. So we encourage you as you go about your end-of-life planning. If you need anything, we're here for you. If you're looking for anything, our resources are here for you. And we are so thankful that you spent this time with us today. So with that in mind, I will let you go. Look for the recording on our website and more resources there.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi, thank you.